All right, welcome to our July Service Dog Handler Chat. We're happy to be hosting a special guest with Dr. Holly Tett from Paws Up Dogs. She's over in the UK, so it's late at night for her and kind of different varied times here for us. So that was a struggle, but Holly's no stranger to us. She's been here a few times and we've all been to her stuff a few times. And so we appreciate the fact that she's willing to come back. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the feel it first kind of mentality and how we can kind of help ourselves when things don't really go as planned. And so, before we get into all of that, I just want to remind people that in case we have any latecomers, staying on mute, raising your hand does really help. So, if it takes us a minute to unmute, that's usually why. Just keeps the flashing down, and we have some seizure people that watch this, and if it flashes back and forth from person to person, that can trigger some seizures. So we try to be very cautious of that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Dr. Holly, you want to kind of introduce yourself a little bit better?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Holly. I am a behaviorist and also a clinical psychologist in the UK. I have my own, we call them assistance dog, but service dogs. I have my own service dog here. And I was just saying before we started recording, I'm in the process of training up one of my puppas to become the next in line, which is an entertaining process to say the least. She's doing really well on some things and is hilarious on others. So my dogs have kind of dual roles. So they help me with PTSD support and they also help me with some mobility issues that kind of fluctuate for me. So one of the skills that I'm teaching her at the moment is a really simple one to unload the washing machine, and she loves that. It's just a great task, and she puts everything into the basket except for the socks, which she takes, runs off to her bed, and then lies on, so none of the other dogs can take them. And I'm like, well, that's great, Strudel, but that's not going to help me when I can't move over to pick them off the floor. So yeah, that's quite entertaining. But yes, I mainly work with, I work with a few different groups of people. I work with dogs and their people. I also work with dog professionals, and I talk about the role of trauma and past experiences and how we can kind of overcome and transcend that so that we can have a better life with our dogs in the present.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And that's kind of why we thought you'd be great for this topic, because we know your history and different things that we've done with you that you and the even the tips you've shared in previous talks with us have been wonderful to kind of implement. And so one of the key things that I see a lot of teams struggle with, and may just be that this is really on the top of my mind because I'm in the midst of formulating a blog for it for our website. But so one of the big things that I see is and you mentioned you're training a new dog, and Strudel is in the adolescent stage at this point. Bella's just hitting her crazy adolescent stage. My service dog in training. So yeah, I know that feeling. And we see so many handlers that hit someplace in that adolescent stage, and all of a sudden something in their eyes, and I mean it could be in my eyes too, I could react the same way. Something happens that wasn't expected, and there's an overreaction, and all of a sudden now they're washing their adolescent dog for one small detail, even though everything else was great. And so kind of the goal of like helping people decide when some of those things could be worked through, when some of those things might be age related issues, is a big part of what I do. I actually love the crazy adolescent stage and love working with dogs at that stage. One of the tricks is you never know what dog you're going to get that day, because they're not always the same dog you worked with, even if it was yesterday or last week or last month. So it can make it challenging, but I like that challenge. But not every dog owner does, and especially not every disabled person. And that can be really, really challenging to work through that. So I know that's kind of one of the things that prompted this. And Holly and I both have a common saying, which is where our title came from, is you need to feel it first. You need to think about it. So this is something that like I really didn't talk over to Holly, and I haven't really made super public, but my admin know. So I'm going to share a recent story of me needing to feel it and really needing to feel it. So most people know I have a service dog, Azul. He's 4 years old. Since September, he's had some struggles. Like he was neutered in September, had a seizure in October, came down with Lyme disease in January, so was on treatment for that all of February. And like just it's been boom, 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 attack, 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 health related issues. And now he's having issues with his vision. And it seems to come and go. It fluctuates. Some days are better than others. And we've had eyes tested. It's not cataracts. It's not, you know, I can't even begin to count the thousands of dollars we put into testing on him. But basically, it's boiled down to a neurological issue that sometimes he's fine and sometimes he's not. Which, so at 4 years old, we got Belle to be a second family pet, to be kind of a demo dog at the training office. And I was going to put her through some of the basic puppy socialization type stuff for service dog work, but I was intending on her not needing to be a service dog for a very long time. However, with Azul's health and his, like now his nose isn't working the way it should, which is apparent when it doesn't work when we're doing fun nose work. He's missing his medical alerts on a regular basis, even when nothing else is going on. And Belle is hitting them, not quite as early as Azul used to, but well in time to be able to respond to it. And so, like that whole idea of transitioning from one service dog to another was not something I was anticipating in doing at this stage in the game. But I had to really stop and process that and really allow myself just to feel it, to feel that loss of what we had. And like, it's not that I'm not still connected to Azul, and like he's sitting right here beside me on my left side with Belle on my right. So I mean, he still comes to work with me every day. He's still a huge part of my life. But it's different now because he doesn't have that desire to work. He works about once a week at the grocery store trip, something Belle's not really up to training to be able to do yet. And it's something he loves to do in an environment he loves, and it's a nice, cool, air conditioned environment, which makes it easier for him. And that's about all he is working at this point. The rest of the time, he's being a dog, a well spoiled, well cared for, well loved dog, but a dog. And so, I mean, that has been something that I've really had to work through on an emotional level. And I know many of our other people have things like that happen too. So, with that, that's my story of my recent need to feel it. Holly, do you kind of want to explain a little bit about what you mean by the feel it? And like our title is Feel It First. So, something bad happens, something not according to plan happens. And then what do you do?
Yeah, it's a big question. And firstly, I just want to, I don't even know what the word is, empathize with you, really. I have had very similar experience recently myself with my own dog, and it's gut-wrenching. And I know this isn't what we're talking about today, but something which I try and talk about with people often is this idea of anticipatory grief. And this is really like a really important topic in the service dog industry, because when we're thinking about what we mean by anticipatory grief is essentially grieving for someone before they have gone. And this is really common in the dog world because, of course, most of us get a dog assuming that we might outlive them. Not everybody, but most people. And so we, at some point in their lives, start to anticipate that, oh gosh, I'm going to not be with this dog at some point. And especially when you start to have health problems and things, even if they're not super serious and we're not talking about anything like that, that process can start to happen. And I think especially when we're thinking about service dogs, it's even more significant because there's a whole other layer of relationship that we're talking about here and connection. And if we have to go through the process of starting to train up another dog, that's a grieving process too, even though that first dog is still with us. Like you say, that relationship is changed somehow, and navigating that is really complex. And I think that's a really good example of those kinds of emotions are intense and we feel them really strongly. Lots of different ones, whether it's feeling guilt when you see that new dog working and the old dog isn't working, or whether you feel a bit of anger or resentment. Oh gosh, I thought I'd be working with you. I trust you. We've got it down and now you can't do it anymore. And that can feel really difficult because you think, I don't want to be angry at my dog, but it's not that you're angry at the dog, it's the situation often. So I think when those big intense emotions come in, often what we do as people is we go, oh no, no, I'm sorry, I don't like how guilt feels. I don't like how anger feels or sadness. I've felt that before many times in my life. It was not pleasant. And so I am going to push it away. I'm either going to distract myself or I'm going to feel it really intensely for a second and then quickly push it down and pretend it's not happening. Sometimes we think, I'll just put a logical head on, I'll just find a solution to this problem. And the difficulty with that is that, as lots of us know, if we do that a lot, those emotions, they find a way to come out. And sometimes they come out through your physical health. You'll notice a deterioration in physical health. Sometimes they come out explosively in another situation. You think, my gosh, why did I just have that enormous reaction because someone cut me off in traffic or someone pushed in front of me in the supermarket or something like that? Or you see the relationships, your close relationships, whether it's with a partner, a friend, a colleague, or with your dog, start to deteriorate a little bit, and you're feeling yourself getting really frustrated and irritable more than you usually would. And that's just those emotions kind of trying to find an out. So what I try to encourage people to do, and also myself, because I do not find this easy at all, is to find a way to spend a little bit of time allowing yourself to feel whatever it is that you're feeling without any judgment from yourself. So if you feel angry, if you feel guilty, allowing yourself to sit with that emotion, and we can talk about how to do that if that's helpful, without then coming in with this critical voice in your head going, oh, you shouldn't be thinking that, oh, you shouldn't be feeling that. Because when you do that, when you actually sit with it, it takes some of that intensity out of it. It takes some of the power out of that big feeling. And then you can start to move forward and look at things that can possibly help. But if you don't spend any time actually with that emotion, it often gets more intense, and no one really wants that, I don't think. So yeah, that's how I tend to think about it.
Yeah, that can be a really big thing. And I know a huge part of it, like you said, is that guilt of how do you take the new dog out for training without taking the other dog out with you because you've never left them home. And I have another client struggling with that. Like his other dogs are all at home service dogs. Um, they were too old at the point where he needed a service dog to be able to actually start them, and they didn't have the socialization, so they couldn't do public access stuff. So he has three dogs that are all at home service dogs. Two of them kind of go with his wife more, and one was more with him. And then they brought in this new puppy. Well, now he's really struggling to actually train the puppy as a service dog because he's already anticipating that struggle of she's going to be going in the car with me more. She's going to be going out and about with me more. And then the other dogs are always going to get left behind.
Mm,
And so it's not even happening yet, but that grief of it's going to happen if I make this dog an actual service dog instead of just keeping it, a family pet, one that can go out and do public access. That means it's going to go with me everywhere. And the other dogs are going to feel guilty or jealous. He's feeling guilty that the other dogs are going to feel jealous. And I mean, that is something that a lot of our teams have to process when you have a multi-dog household.
yeah, yeah,
So,
absolutely. It's and I don't know if it's something that we think about ahead of time. So especially if you are moving from your first dog to your second dog, you would never have had this experience before. And so when you experience something for the first time that's really difficult, it's even more difficult because you don't have the history. So if you're talking about adolescent dogs earlier, I've brought, I think, I don't know, 8 dogs through adolescence through like personal dogs that I have. And each time I'm like, this is really hard today. But I remember when Aya was 10 months. I remember when Squid was a year old. That was really hard then. Now look at her. And so I can go, okay, yeah, I've got this evidence to show that it will be okay. But when it's the first time with anything, it's much harder, I think. So kind of bearing that in mind and cutting yourself a bit of slack is a good move.
Speaking of that adolescence, not that I want to interrupt you, but we actually started a crazy canine adolescent Facebook group when both Nick and Azul just entered adolescence. Nick is Cindy's service dog. And that is like a free, open to post anything kind of group where you can post, my dog just did this and I want to strangle them. Anything. You can, of course, we post some adolescent kind of training tips occasionally and whatnot, but it's more of a, if you're struggling with something and you need to get it out, put it there. It's a no judgment zone. You can post anything you want. And it's a super small group. I think right now there's only about 20 people in it, but dogs grow up. They're not in adolescence forever. So we make that they're available, like join when you need it, stay as long as you want, leave when your dog is past that. And it's a way of, just kind of connecting with other people that have been there and done that. And I know we've got another person in our working paws group that is there right now. So her dog has just recently turned a year old, a little bit older. So she's close to like 14 months old now and really struggling with some fears in new environments. And so she is a total rock star in practiced environments, but new environments are scary. And I understand. And to me, like with all that I've done with adolescence, I know what she's going through. I know what the dog's going through. And I know that it's the wrong timing in that dog's life to expose to new environments. So I'm able to kind of work her through it. And so, I mean, that's one of my guidances in there. All right, so I know you want to finish her up and get her fully trained. But there's sometimes that point in adolescence where taking a break and only doing the things that you know your dog loves during that time frame can make a world of difference. So that's one of the things that I tell people to do. If you're struggling with an adolescent dog and they're driving you crazy, take your time to feel it, to process that craziness, that to whoever, have your whatever it is, a family member, a friend, a dog trainer, somebody that you can just spout out and vent to if you need to. So that makes you feel better. And then find something that both you and your dog love and stick to that for a while. Just do that. Nothing else. Because then it helps us to process that hurt, that anger, that frustration that we're feeling, whatever the huge emotion is, in a way that reminds us of all the good emotions that we want to feel. It helps us to bring more of that positive back into our lives. And it allows the dog to have that little bit of grow up time so that they can then, so it's not as big of a struggle when we start training those new environments or whatever that hardship was in a few months. Go ahead, Cindy.
But just to kind of piggytail on that, it's also important that, when you have some of those struggles and they sometimes become public, to it's important to know that you're not alone, that almost everybody who has a service dog that they've owner trained is going to have had some incident where their dog was not perfect, in the store, wherever they thought it should have been perfect. And if people start, if you post on Facebook, you're going to get an attack on some level at some point. And it's important to realize that you can't take those attacks personally, because those people generally don't know you, and it's difficult to not take them personally. But it's okay to have those feelings about, hey, I'm just being attacked and I didn't do anything other than have an adolescent dog.
Social media is definitely a beast. And we could do a whole other Zoom just on how to deal with social media stuff. But it can even be sometimes not social media. I know we also deal with sometimes a lot of our friends and family, And like, I have to say, I have one of the most supportive families ever, but not all of them understand why I choose to have a service dog. Some of them are even more disabled than I am. Not that it's a competition in who's more disabled, but some of them actually have just their disability is more advanced than mine. They're older than me too. And so like when we're together, I usually spend some of my time helping them. And if I wasn't helping them, or if I didn't have my service dog, I wouldn't be able to help them. And like, so my husband is also disabled. He doesn't want a service dog, but he uses my service dogs a lot at home. And so I've trained my dogs to actually, if I ask them to go and do something for somebody else. Like my husband's the cook in the family. I know Holly and I both share this. Neither one of us really love to cook. And my husband is the cook. So I'll gladly be at my desk or on the couch or in my recliner or whatever on my computer and let my service dog go lay in the kitchen and help my husband cook and pick up anything that he drops. And like when my 6-month-old puppy at the time handed him back a full hot dog, I think that's pretty good. He accidentally dropped a whole hot dog on the floor and he asked her to get it and she picked it up and didn't even hesitate, handed it right back to him. And so, I mean, that shows some pretty good restraint and why I don't mind like sending my dog to do a job for somebody else occasionally. And I think that's part of, that's one of the things that if you say that on social media, we get people that will say, oh, wait, you can't have your service dog working for anyone else. And in public, true, in the US anyways, a service dog is there to help one person. But at home or with your family, you can do whatever you want. So I think that's one of the other things for people to remember is that the reason I do that is so this past weekend was a horrendous weekend for me health wise. Horrendous. I spent much of one day like totally curled up in the couch, going in and out of consciousness, in and out of sleep kind of thing, and not moving. And my husband was taking care of my dogs because I sure wasn't able to do it. And if they weren't used to him lending a hand here and there from day to day, they would have struggled more with me being that sick. There was nothing they could do to help me. Absolutely nothing at that point. They did minor things like carrying me my water bottle from the kitchen, or Belle brought me my shot one day from the kitchen. Of course, it's in a nice sealed box. It wasn't that she was carrying a needle or anything, but she carried the box into me from the kitchen where my husband handed it to her and stuff like that. So, but for the most part, they couldn't do anything to make me feel better. So why not let them be a dog and play and go outside and play with my husband and stuff like that when there's nothing that they can do? And that's the kind of community that I think we all need when we're owner training. And I know not everybody has it. Like my community is not as strong as I'd like it to be. I would definitely like it to be stronger. My close at home community, people that can actually lend a hand. But it's that thought of when things go wrong, often we will then struggle to share those things and remember that sometimes it's not us the only ones that are feeling it, that other people in our community might be feeling it as well. So I think that's another aspect that we need to look at. Cindy, if you want to go ahead, and then afterwards, I want Holly to kind of talk about a little bit of some of the tips she uses to help people kind of go through that.
I was just going to say, I've had Nick do tasks in public for other people because like one episode we had Julie in the process of passing out, one of my clients was having issues with her blood pressure and was repeatedly passing out. And we needed to get her into her vehicle where her dad was going to drive her home. And part of that process meant separating her from her service dog, but we also needed DPT at the same time to keep her from passing out. So I actually had cued Nick to get up on her lap in her scooter and sit in her lap and do DPT because he's been trained to do it. And it's one of those times where I'm really glad I have a dog that is trained to not only listen to me, but to also follow directions to help other people. And in that situation, if the choice is we're going to have a bigger medical problem because her specific dog isn't available to perform that task, but my dog is available and can perform the task, I think it's perfectly acceptable to put a dog that can perform the needed task in its place if everybody's agreeable. And if I posted anything about that on social media, I would probably catch major flack for having my dog do a task for somebody else that he knows. I'm perfectly okay with it. And I think we need to get over that kind of rigid thinking, even though the definition is the dog is trained to perform a task for a certain individual. If the dog's tasks cross over and there's a need, I think it's more important to have the dog do the task on somebody else's direction.
I understand why the ADA is the way it is with the dog is trained to do one person. You know, in public, the
Right.
dog is there to support the disabled person. It's very rare when you're going to have multiple disabled people in the same small circle, unless you happen to be out with a service dog training group. You know, it's
Right.
very rare. And I certainly don't want my dogs to go do a migraine alert on somebody else out in public. However, they've done it on other people in my training center or in my home, or so Azul actually also has the knack of telling us when people are pregnant, which I know other dogs have done in the past too. But so he has told me that 2 of my clients were pregnant. They both knew it, but I didn't know it. But he disclosed it, and then they disclosed it. I'm like, yeah, I knew. So, I mean, I don't mind that, like, it. So, for me, the training center that I have, it's a small training center. My dogs spend a lot of time here. It's a second home. So, they socialize and visit with everybody. They're not necessarily on the job as service dogs the whole time they're here. As medical alert dogs, they are. But so I think it's kind of important that we, have that distinction between what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable for each dog. And that is a whole nother Zoom. So let's go back to thinking about, so if we're struggling, something has gone awry. It could be anything. Could be you're training a new dog. It could be you're training your first dog and all of a sudden now they're barking at people when they've never barked at people. I have Belle. Not that she's my first dog, but barking is an issue. So that's always on the forefront of my mind. It could be all of a sudden now they're chasing cats. So now their heel isn't perfect when you're outside walking. Anything. So when something goes wrong, what is your first step?
So for me, you've got 2 first steps because you have in the moment and then you have outside of the moment, right? So in the moment, this is going to be so individual. I think it really depends on what works for you. But what I encourage myself and my students to do is get to a place of safety. Now, that may be that you have to move to a place of safety, or that might be that you have to do something for yourself or your dog for you to both feel emotionally safe. So that's going to be really varied depending on the situation, what's going on. I'll give you a couple of examples. So this was really horrible, actually. A couple of months ago, I was on the tube in London, the metro. And I had Aya, she's a Pyrenean mountain dog, Great Pyrenees, so she's a big dog, who was sat, and because the metro in London is super tight, like it's really narrow. So I kind of sat on the end of where the seats were, and she was sat next to me, but just where you would get on the train. So she was kind of in that space there. There was space for people to move around her. But anyway, someone got on the train, sat opposite us, and then said, "Why is that dog on here?" Now, dogs are allowed on the trains generally in the UK, so that would be normal anyway. And I said, "Oh, she's my assistant's dog. She's working." And he just took offense, and it was a whole thing. Anyway, as he got off the train, he poured his coffee on top of her head. Now thankfully it was cold and she's very furry anyway, but that was a real, like, I did not anticipate that happening at all. Like, it was a real shock for me. I had a big reaction from the public. One person who followed this guy off the train shouting after him, like it was a whole thing. Aya, bless her, was just like, what's happened? I didn't even notice. My fur's so thick, thankfully. But it was really intense in that moment. And I could feel my anxiety go straight up. She alerted me to that. And I was like, we need to get to a place of safety. So rather than stay on that tube for another 5 stops, which is what I needed to do, I got off at the next one, not the same one as the man. We sat just on a bench for a little while, and we did I do quite a lot of co-regulation exercises with my dog. So using one of the senses. So for Aya, she really loves massage. So I would do kind of 30 seconds of massage on her and then 30 seconds on my own arm. So we're kind of using the same technique, which both of us find relaxing. So that was both physical safety, waiting for the next stop and then getting off, not pursuing on, even though I was like, I just need to get to where I need to go. I was like, no, Holly, get off the train. And then also that emotional safety. So thinking about what you and your dog need in that moment is really important, I think. And then externally, and this can either be done before you get yourself a situation if you think it's going to be potentially triggering in some way, or as a kind of recovery after a situation. What I like to do, I may have spoken about this before, I can't remember, forgive me if I have, but I will just set an alarm on my phone for 5 minutes. I will try and find a quiet place in my home if that's possible. I know some houses are busier than others, but as quiet as you can. And in those 5 minutes, you are just going to focus on the most intense feeling that you have. So in that moment, my most intense feeling was probably fear, to be honest. That was how I felt. I felt really fearful in that moment. And so I put my alarm on the platform, and I allowed myself to really feel that fear that I felt. And every time my mind tried to drift off and say, no, I don't like that, I'm going to think about dinner or I'm going to think about something else, I tried to pull it back in. And then as soon as the alarm went off, you have to do something different. So for me, I try and do something physical. If I'm not having a great day with kind of mobility wise, I might just like literally move my feet up and down, clap my hands. If I'm much more mobile, I'll do some kind of steps from side to side or some jumps up and down. It really depends. But basically, you want to move your body in some way, shape, or form so that you can kind of shake it off, almost literally like a dog does. Full on shake off. That's kind of what we want to do as well. So like I said before, what you're doing there is you're saying to your brain, okay, all right, I know you're feeling these intense emotions. Let's feel them then. Let's process them a little bit, and then let's let them go. And it may be that it comes back to you an hour later and you feel it again. You can do it again. It doesn't have to be one and done, but it will usually help you to move through it much more quickly than it would if you were like, I don't want to think about that, push it away, push it away. So that's, yeah, a couple of things that I do in the moment or before or after.
I do the same thing kind of in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, again, I have mobility issues, so I can only be very mobile for a short period of time. And so when I'm in that feel it mode where I'm just letting myself do it is when I'm moving. I might be cleaning my house. I might step outside and go for a quick walk. I might whatever. But that's where I let myself feel it while I'm moving, because eventually my body's going to say, no more moving, stop. And when I take that break, I sit down with, whether it's my favorite piece of chocolate or my soda or whatever. And when I sit down, it's all right, we're done. No more. So
Yeah.
the same process, just the actions that work for me are reversed. And
Yeah.
that is so helpful to just be able to know that, the goal is that you're switching activity from whatever is helping you process to, all right, now we're done for now. Anyways, go ahead,
And sorry, go on.
When you were talking about the massage, and the shaking it off, I was just gonna say, when I'm having stuff like that, I have taught Nick how to shake it, to literally shake it off. And so if he's having an issue where because he tends to be on the more emotional side of dogs, being a poodle. And so if he's having an issue where he's having a bigger emotion, he will actually stop and literally shake it off while we're walking. And I think it's something that as handlers, when we're taking care of ourselves, it's also important to remember that our dogs have emotions and feelings also, and that they need these skills, whether it's a massage, stopping and petting them, giving them a cut, giving them something that they need to calm down. But to also teach them skills. I think it's Leslie McDermott with Control Unleashed talks about teaching your dog to deep breathe. And I've done that with Nick also. And that's a big help, so that now when I take a deep breath or a sigh, he also does it. And I cannot emphasize how much deep breathing has helped me over the years, just with my own emotional regulation.
Yeah, and I think with breathing, there's so many techniques out there, and so many of them are really complicated. So it's like breathe in for a certain number, breathe out for a certain number, short breath in through your nose, out through your mouth. I just say to people, just breathe. That's all you need to do. Just focus on breathing, whether it is deep, whether it's not deep, just literally focusing on that, because that's what grounds you. Don't worry about remembering some complicated system. It's just in and out. And same with our dogs, because we're not going to say to our dogs, right, you breathe in for a count of 10, then out for 7, just exactly them kind of mimicking that. My dog's the same. If I do a sigh, not even realizing it, and I'm busy working, he goes and then lies down on the floor. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool, because we did so much of that when he was struggling. Now it's just, he goes, oh yeah, that's nice, that feels really good. So yeah.
I kind of do the reverse there too. And every time my dogs sigh, I automatically sigh. So they have me trained there. If they sigh, I sigh. And it makes sure we're connected. It grounds us both together. And I see my dog smile after I do it. Like Azul has the the oddest smile. And like it's something that brings us both joy. And so like he knows he can make me smile simply by smiling. And that's my cue to him. If he's has those huge emotions, I can put a smile on my face and he'll smile, and it helps him change his emotions, and it reminds him like we're still together, we're good. Yeah. And so that's our way of, instead of breathing, it's just, well, let's share a smile, let's make eye contact and smile at each other, and it just makes all those happy feelings. Usually launches into a game of being silly and laughing and giggling, but that's where it starts. It starts with a smile, and it changes a world. So
and so much of this is so instinctual. I think often we feel like we have to fall back on a training protocol or procedure, but often what feels natural to you is the most helpful thing. So one of my dogs was at the vet today. He hates the vet. He has to go every 6 months for bloods. He really he's in a better place than he ever was. It used to be horrific, but he doesn't like it. And so while they were taking the blood, I was just singing to him. I sang Jingle Bells, I sang Humpty Dumpty, whatever came into my head. I looked like an idiot, but I was like, I don't care, because that's what's helping my dog in this moment. And that's nothing to do with training. It's just because that feels comforting to him. So often just following your instincts a little bit is the best thing you can do, I think.
I've been known to break into supercalifragilisticexpialidocious a few times. That's what frustration is hitting. And like, you feel like you need to tell your dog to do something, but it's frustration, and it's just like it's not going to help, and either they're not going to respond, it's going to frustrate you more, or they're going to get it wrong or something. You just, because you both of you are frustrated, and so by the time you say that word, you can't be frustrated anymore. You just can't. So little things like that. And I mean, I definitely sing to my dogs. They know it. They're the only ones that like my horrible singing. So, but I think that brings up a really important point, in that, everybody's coping mechanisms are going to be a little bit different. And so it's not about follow this one or follow that one. But if we don't take the time to try to process those emotions, it ends up hurting us much more down the line and impacts our relationship with our dog. Yeah, Cindy likes to do the bibbity bobbity boo. But that's a good one too. There's a lot of silly things out there we can do that like can't help but put a smile on your face. So I know that one of my things right now that I struggle with, and like anybody who's watched any of these Zooms over the last few months, it's been an ongoing topic, is my puppy Belle's barking. And it's totally a different bark than what many dogs bark, because she doesn't bark when she's scared. If she's scared, she's going to be totally silent and lean into me. So she doesn't have that afraid bark, at least not yet. She doesn't alert bark to stuff usually. She has started to alert bark to some of the tractor, big forklift stuff that if they stop right outside my window, she's fine if they drive past. But if they stop outside the window, she might alert bark to that. And that's the only thing she ever alert barks to. Every other bark is she wants something. It's communication. She wants to go see the person. She wants me to play a game. She wants me to toss her ball or dig her ball out from underneath the sofa or whatever, but she always wants something. And that's what her bark is. She wants me to fling her flirt pole. That's a big one. If I touch the flirt pole, she launches into instant barking because she cannot wait for it to start flying. So that barking issue it's a trigger for me. It always has been. Like, I don't like to hear dogs bark. I don't mind a one or two, hey, somebody's here bark. And Belle actually did that in Walmart the other day. And I was okay with it because so it was a day where I felt really bad. I wasn't really paying attention to my environment. We were done. We were sitting by the entrance waiting for my son to finish what we were doing so that we could leave. And in walks this German Shepherd, which I love German Shepherds, but in walks this dog, totally like way out in front of his person, not connected to his person at all, just basically in wild mode. And Belle let out a bark at it. If she hadn't, that dog would have came in contact with her. But she let out one bark. I was able to look, see the dog, ask her to move around behind the chair I was sitting in and come to the other side where she was safe. And she instantly stopped barking. She just did it that once. And I'm okay with that. And while it was still that, hey, puppy, come say hi to me, bark. And it's not something I necessarily want in public. I was thankful for it because it helped us respond in a way that got us all to that safety, right? It was the easy way to safety. And then we can work on the barking when dogs come through the door, which is something we are already working on. Not that she's ever done it in public before, but she's done it at work before. So I knew it was something we needed to work on. So it's kind of that later on, I can think, okay, yeah, that dog was really out of control. And even if it was an alert bark in that stance, I would have been okay with it because I needed her to tell me something was about to change in the environment that we needed to take action for because she didn't know what action needed to be taken. She instantly followed my cues, which I was grateful for because, had we been at the training center, she may not have listened to what I was telling her because her arousal level might have skyrocketed too high. But where we were at, she was still in control enough to immediately listen to what I was telling her to do. And it worked really well. And so there's a part of me that thinks, oh no, my dog barked in public. So we go through all the things. Did anybody see it? Did anybody hear it? I hope nobody's mad. I hope nobody comes around and saying, who's that dog that barked? Which dog barked? And creates more of a scene. And so all those things kind of run through our mind in that moment after the fact. And if we don't take the time to think about, all right, which one of those are important? Which one of those are going to lead to something that we need to work on in the future? And which one of those are our mind just kind of carrying away with us that we need to all right, yeah, it's possible. So what if somebody else heard it and comes around the corner and looks at Belle? It would have been an issue if somebody would have came around, cursing us out or something would have added more stress, but nobody did. And I'm sure people heard it because, she's got a loud German Shepherd bark. So it's kind of that trying to figure out which things here are actually helpful for us to change for future. What can we change to make it better in the future? And what things are just our mind carrying away with us? And I like to try to separate things in those two categories, because that really helps me then focus more on what can I do to change future events versus living in the past. And when we focus on things that have happened in the past, it tends to hurt our training more. For me, anyways. Any kind of tips with that, or what are your next steps up, after the moment has passed, after you're
So
in safety?
I think you're right. When we focus on the past, it can be really unhelpful. It can also be really unhelpful to focus too much on the future, because it's not reality yet. It's what we fear is going to happen next, right? Oh my gosh, she's barked in the supermarket. Next time we come to the supermarket, it's going to happen again. Next time there's a dog at the end of their leash, it's going to happen again. Oh no, I'm not going to be able to get this under control. And we start going often down these spirals of things that haven't even happened yet, but our brain gets carried away. So one of my top tips for this, and this takes practice, just like all of these things do. This stuff's not easy, but asking yourself, there's two things going on here. There's the reality of the situation, and there's the meaning I gave it in my head. So the reality of the situation was you were waiting with your dog. Something unexpected happened. Your dog said, "Whoa, that's unexpected," and used her way of communicating that to you. You responded to it. Everything was okay. That was the reality of the situation. But what our brain can do is go, "Oh, I'm not a very good trainer," or maybe this isn't the right dog for me, or maybe I'm not the right person for this dog, or maybe my dog should be better trained by now. My dog is 10 months or a year or 2.5. It should be, quote, fully trained by now. All this meaning that we put onto it about us, what we're doing a bad job of, where we could be better, all of this stuff. That's where we get really caught up in how we're feeling, and it becomes much, much bigger. So trying to say to yourself, what was the reality? If someone watching from outer space saw this moment, what would they see in reality? And then how is that different from what I'm creating in my mind? Because often they are worlds apart. And in terms of how you then move forward with that, to be honest, actually just being aware of that is the most important thing, because we can't stop our brains from doing that sometimes. They get wired that way. But it's just about catching it and going, hang on a second, what was the reality here and what am I creating? Because then that awareness means that you start to catch it quicker and quicker over time, and then you feel more in control. And I think that's what most of us want in life, to feel in control of our own emotions and thoughts, even just a little bit more. So yeah, that's what I would try.
And I think that's awesome. Usually when I'm thinking towards the future, and hopefully you can't hear the water bottle Belle was loving right now. But so when I'm looking to the future, I'm looking at how can I do better at setting my dog up for success in our next outing. So I'm not looking at the grand scheme of future. I'm looking at what can I change training wise to set my dog up for success. And in that particular situation, that was not one that Belle is usually in, because A, she doesn't usually go to the grocery store with us. B, I had to go because I had to get prescriptions from the pharmacy. My son was doing all the grocery shopping except for the one item that I had to pick out that he didn't understand. And that's why we were sitting at the door kind of waiting, which is something we have never done with her and I haven't practiced with her. So that's what I add to my future plan. I need to spend more time sitting near the door, allowing her to see people come and go. Maybe not at Walmart, but I can do that same thing in pet-friendly locations that we visit on a regular basis that she's comfortable in, to help her experience more that come and go. And then once she's done that, I can even set it up where I'm having some of my clients or, other dogs that I know and that I know I can have some confidence and control over coming in the door while we're sitting by the door. So that we have, that kind of protection and that training to set her up for that. But, in the grand scheme of things, even if that were Azul, I would have appreciated some kind of an alert to, hey, Mom, what do we do here? And Azul would have like hit me with his paw or something, because he uses nose nudges for medical alerts. And if he touches me with his paw, or if he does a chin rest, that usually means look around and see what else is going on, because there's something that's causing those two behaviors, because they don't happen naturally. It's usually something in the environment that has his attention. Or he also does so he's got normally the husky curly tail, and he also has golden retriever in him. So when something in the environment changes that he loves, his curly tail automatically goes into a golden retriever point, which is the weirdest thing to see on a husky. A husky actually pointing. But so usually I pay attention to what his tail's doing. And if I see it, even if I can't focus on anything else in the environment, because my brain is just not there, I see the difference between his curly tail and his pointy tail. And that tells me I need to focus wherever he's looking.
Yeah.
And so he has learned to communicate in other ways other than barking. And at some point in time, I'll get Belle there where she can communicate in other ways, which she's getting better all the time. But right now, barking is still her default, and I don't fault her for that. I wanted to know that dog was coming in. We also had, just 5 minutes later, as we were actually walking out the door, another service door dog was walking in the door. And so like Belle kind of went on high alert. She didn't bark, but like I noticed her body position, and I was trying to decide which door are we going out, because our stores have an enter door and an exit door. But it looked like we had a bunch of people coming in our exit door. So I was going to actually go out the enter door, and then we saw the service dog coming in the enter door. So I'm like, nope, I'll take the crowd and go the other way, just to give them, the extra 5 feet between dogs. And she totally didn't bark at that dog, because I saw it at the same time she did, and we were able to then communicate what we're going to do, how we're going to maneuver this, and she followed my directions. So if she has to get my attention by barking, I don't mind that, as long as it's geared toward me and getting me to pay attention to what's going on. Go ahead, Cindy.
Okay, so first I want to read Ashlyn's comment. She said Lily only barks if something is out of place usually. The other thing I wanted to ask Holly is, so it's very easy when you have a, lack of a better term, negative event or an undesirable event happen, like Belle barking in the middle of Walmart. When you have something like that happen, how do you recommend stopping that negative self-talk spiral that often develops of, woulda, shoulda, coulda, I'm so embarrassed, all that stuff that happens when you know you could, when you don't like the situation as it evolved, but would like, stop that, because it's very easy to dwell on those things for far longer than is not only necessary, but is healthy.
Yeah. So do you mean more sort of past the moment, but later that day and thinking about it over the weekend? And yeah. So I do think that kind of awareness of yourself doing it is the first step. I think as well, noticing that it's not just about what happened in the moment, because I think most of us can agree that in that situation, if our dog started barking, we probably would feel some kind of spike of stress. And depending on what kind of person you are, that could be relatively minor, or that could be like, oh my gosh, my dog just barked, it feels like the end of the world. So I talk about kind of trauma and past experiences quite a lot. And for me, it really took a process of trying to understand why, because I also find barking really challenging despite being a behaviorist, but specifically my dog's barking. I'm not too bothered about other people's dogs barking, but when it's mine, I get a real kind of intense anxiety reaction. And for me personally, when I really kind of tracked it back, it was because as a child, there was an awful lot of conflict in the home that I grew up in, lots of shouting, whether that was sometimes directed towards me or between adults. And so as a young person growing up in those formative years, I learned that loud noises were scary and unpredictable, and I had to be wary of adults around me as a young person when that was happening. And there's lots of examples of this. So it may not be your childhood. It could have been, let's say, taking barking as an example. If you were ever in an abusive relationship as an adult or any kind of situation. So I worked for years in psychiatric hospitals, which were often really loud, really noisy. And so any of that kind of sudden noise, for me, my body goes risk, 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 alert, alert, alert. Something dangerous is about to happen to you. And even though it's just my dog barking, and I know logically it's just my dog barking, my body has a response first. So if that's your experience, regardless of what the behavior is, I recommend just taking a little bit of time. If you're a person that likes to write, you could use a pen and paper, you could record it using your voice, whatever works for you. But just the next time it happens, sit down, take 30 minutes and just write and see what comes up. So my dog barked in the store today. It really stressed me out. I was really worried about what other people would think. And then just see where your brain takes you next. And I always say to people, if you can, try and go for at least 30 minutes, because that's when the good stuff usually starts to come out. We start to get a bit of our brain goes, oh, it connects to this and it connects to that. Now, it's not about giving yourself therapy. You can absolutely go and see a professional if you want to work on that and really understand it. But it's just about giving your brain a bit of space to process what's happened and why it's stressing you out so much. And if you do that a few times, often it does start to decrease. So my younger dog, Strudel, at the moment has gone through a really tricky part of adolescence where she suddenly, apparently, started barking at other dogs. And she absolutely loved dogs up until that point. And at first it was definitely a bit of frustrated greeting. She was like, let me get to them. And then a couple of dogs barked back at her. And now there's a little bit of a fear response in there too. So we're kind of working on two things. And I must admit, when it first happened, probably the first 5 or 10 times, I had a big emotional reaction to that because it reminded me of my first dog and how challenging that was. But then just taking the time to do that exercise, now I'm much better at being like, well, that wasn't ideal, but let's just see how we can set her up a little bit better and myself up a little bit better next time. So yeah, having a little almost journaling time can be really helpful with these things, I think.
Yeah, that's my biggest motivation for doing my dishes. Because when I'm doing my dishes, there's very rarely, unless my house is empty, I might put music on, but generally, like, there's no electricity around me other than my lights. There's no phone distracting me, there's no TV distracting me, there's no anything like that. And so that is my time to just mentally work through those things to hit that point of being able to find that thing that you can use to actually help the situation. Whether it's that idea of, oh yeah, I should train with this person. I have another person who's struggling with this. We can use each other's dogs to help each other. If we work at a distance, we can do this, we can do that. Whatever is going to be the situation to help solve the problem, you tend to come up with that, like Holly said, about 30 minutes later. So, just kind of having that time can really, really help, and doing anything that works for you. And I don't know why dishes do that for me, mainly because, like, I hate doing dishes almost as much as I hate cooking. But that's always been my trade-off for not having to cook, is that either my husband, or when my daughter was still living with us, she would do the cooking and I would do the cleanup. And as much as I hate dishes, it's better than cooking in my brain. But I think that's because when I'm cooking, then I have to follow a recipe. I have to think. I have to, and I'm constantly checking that recipe. And just because I'm not a cook naturally, and when it's dishes, I can just let my brain do whatever my brain wants to do. Because you don't have to focus on washing dishes. They all wash the same way, you know?
Mm.
So I I don't know why that's the thing, but that's what I do when I really, really need to think something through. It's my motivation to do the job I don't want to do. So
I think as well, something that's really powerful, and I work quite a lot with people with environmentally sensitive or reactive dogs. And I think what's really helpful is hearing something in your own voice. And letting your brain process it in your own voice. So if you come to a realization when you're doing the dishes or when you're in the shower or whatever you're doing, writing something down, saying it out loud is super, super helpful. So let's say I'm working with a dog and their person, and the dog's just had this big reaction, or maybe they've done really well. They've come across their trigger and they've done really well. Sort of debriefing that situation with your dog is super helpful. So being like, that was amazing. You did so well. You coped so well with that. Or, oh, buddy, that didn't quite go according to plan. Not to worry. We'll figure it out next time. Because what you're doing there is reassuring the dog, which is really important, but you're also reassuring yourself. And when you hear that in your own voice, your brain goes, oh, okay, yeah, cool. I'll cling on to that and I'll remember that for next time. So that's just a little hack that I quite like as well.
yeah, so Ashlyn wanted to say like, so she has a fully trained dog that is retiring, and then her service dog in training is almost fully trained. They're so close. I think they're there, but her mom doesn't agree yet. Anyways, so the one time her service dog actually barked was basically a life-threatening situation. You know, they were sitting on a divided highway. A car was trying to turn around in the grass median where they were at, so Lily started barking at the car. And you know, there are those times where barking might be necessary. Hopefully that got the driver's attention to say, hey, there's somebody here, you know. While we have, especially in the service dog world, there's such a stigma around the idea of barking. Sometimes barking is appropriate. I know a lot of times barking is trained as an alert behavior. And while it's not my choice for an alert behavior because it can be disruptive to others and be misinterpreted by others, um, I know that in some situations people do train that. So it's just to remind us that sometimes things happen that maybe didn't go as planned, but it wasn't the end of the world that we think it is. And sometimes dogs have a reason for what they're doing. I mean, they always have a reason for what they're doing, right? Sometimes that reason may not be in our minds at the moment, and we may not understand it in the moment. And so sometimes I might spend just a little bit of time trying to determine that reason, but that's me like wanting to be able to change my training plan, you know, or change to make set up for success better. So if you know why they barked in that situation, you then know what you need to train to help fix it. And so with that, we are actually past our hour. Holly, do you have any last words you want to add?
I think just generally, we all just need to be less hard on ourselves, to be honest. And I include myself in that because I am terrible at that. But just reminding yourself that it's usually not the end of the world and you're doing a better job than you think you are. It sounds really trite, but I think it's important to remember that.
I would totally agree. And so we do really want to thank you for joining us. You were actually our very first service dog handler chat guest before we
Yeah.
even had the name service dog handler chat. And you don't know this, but you're actually our last service dog handler chat.
Yeah.
So we're reformatting our series, kind of ending what we've been doing, which we've kind of put out there to the masses and it's free on YouTube and everything else. And we're catering more towards the special needs we're seeing in our clients on a day-to-day basis. So we're mixing clients from trainers from like all over the US into this, and it's still going to be open access. Anybody can access it for free, but it's just changing formats. I'm going to get a new rebranding and everything. But so you were the first service dog handler chat guest and the very last. And so we thank you for that and all the time that you've spent with us. And we may have you in on the new format as well. So we're
Thank you.
definitely
Thank you for
not
having me.
totally going away.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I
Yes,
appreciate it.
thank you. And with that, everybody have a great day.